Having said that, that's only one section of the code. So now things get kind of dicey, and this is where there is a little bit of give and take, let's say, with your local building department potentially. Not everybody's interpretation of this next couple of sections is exactly the same. So follow me with this and we'll see where we get with it. So section 708 has to do with fire partitions, and it spells out black and white right there. If you've got separate dwelling units in the building, you're going to separate them with a 1 hour system. We don't care about sprinklers, you're just going to do it. So while the prior charge said that we could take some of those walls and not make them 1 hour, well, this one says those specific walls separating the units got to be 1 hour. Okay? Let's keep moving. There's another separate section, which is what's called the separation of occupancies, table 508.3.3. And so in this particular case, remember we had the drive-under garages, or drive-through garages, I should say. So that was part of the structure. So now that garage unit is a separate piece of the structure. We have 2 occupancies. This table in its reduced form here, trying to hone in again on those specific pieces, you can see that you've got residential and you've got a utility. And notice that below that in the column there, there's an S and there's an NS. S is sprinklered and S is non-sprinklered. In our case, we've got a sprinklered condition. So what this table is telling us now is that separation from the garage from the floor ceiling up to the next unit, or the wall to the unit, those have to be 1 hour. So now what we've done is we've just now identified 3 specific 1 hour assemblies: the dwelling, between dwelling units I should say, and the garage roof ceiling, and the garage wall to the dwelling unit. Then the last thing I've got here really is for the exterior walls. So remember, this project was on a 0 right-of-way and a 0 property line. Again, there's a couple of ways to calculate what's called this building separation. In fact, the specific terminology is the fire separation distance. There's 3 ways to calculate it. In this particular case, the way it was calculated was based on the right-of-way and the property line. So what you can see here is if you look at your occupancy group, which is R, that's the primary one, and the fire separation distance we calculate is 0 feet because it's right on the right-of-way or it's right on the property line, then you have to have a 1 hour wall. Now, there's a piece underneath of this that I've put in here for you to look at here, which says that as soon as you're under 5 feet, now you have to have fire separation from 2 sides. Okay, so here's what we're trying to resolve here. There's either going to be a fire in the structure that we don't want it to get through to an outside building, that's one way, or it could be from an outside building into the structure, that's another one way. In this case, we're worried about potentially either case occurring. So now we've got fire potentially from 2 sides. We've got to make sure that that exterior wall assembly is 1 hour rated, fire coming from either direction. Okay, and again, sprinklers, don't play into this. We're still going to have sprinklers, but we're going to have now these 4 separate pieces of the structure that still have to be 1 hour assemblies. All right, so here's our summary sheet, and I think this is actually done pretty nicely here. The idea here is that we've summarized all the different pieces we just went over. We've identified the specific code sections. You see those are written off to each side. And this actually does a couple things. Obviously, keeps our heads together. We know where we got the information. If we have to go back and dig it again, we can find it. But probably more importantly than that is from the building inspector standpoint, or I should say plans examiner standpoint. When you submit the plans, it's really nice and very quick and much easier for them to be able to scan through this and recognize, oh, I see where he figured this out, this section, etc., as opposed to having the plans examiner thinking it's going to come from a different place, calling you up and saying, hey, what you've done here doesn't jive with what I was thinking. So I guess maybe a word to the wise here. As you start on something like this, I would actually take this to a building department in advance and sit down and say, look, here's what I'm thinking. Do you think the same way? If we do, terrific, we're on the same page. If you don't, then let's sort it out before I get into the drawing phase of this project, and potentially have to come back and make changes. So this is another way to look at this summary. This is just a real quick sketch, just a red line, and we put in there just a couple of spots where we know for sure we're going to have that wall all the way across the very center, that longitudinal wall. That's the 1 hour that separates the garage from the units. The floor above the units is 1 hour. The rest of the units don't have to be 1 hour, but for simplicity's sake, what I think what we'll end up doing in this case is just making it all the exact same assembly, so even though we don't have to have it, we will. And then obviously the separation between the units, and there's the exterior wall and the note about sprinklers. In fact, I would even take that particular drawing, and I think what I'd do is I'd hand that off along with the title issue information to the engineer of record, so that they know exactly where when they're designing, they don't lose track of it. All right, so with all that information, now we've actually got something we can start getting to the nitty-gritty of our design piece with. And the first piece from a design standpoint is to look at what are the fire assemblies that are out there that we can use. There's a bunch of them out there. You can get them right out of the code book. They're listed. Those are sort of generic, if you will. Underwriters Laboratories has a terrific resource. Gypsum Association has one, and AF&PA has another one. So those are all sort of generic places to go. And beyond that, obviously, every manufacturer has their version of it too. So what you're looking at here first is let's get into the walls. Now, it may seem a little odd that we're going to be looking at walls when the title of this course has to do with EWP, but the fact is that the two are not, they're just not mutually exclusive. If you design a wall that's 1 hour and a floor that's 1 hour, for example, that interface, you have to understand what's going to happen there. So we'll look at both of these. This first one here is a standard AF&PA detail. You can read all the details that they have below it here. Notice that this particular drawing I showed you here is rated from one side only. And for those of you who've been around, you know that all you got to do is put 5/8 type X on both sides of the wall, and pretty much bada boom, bada bing, you got 1 hour. And you're golden, okay? The insulation on the inside is an extra plus that gives us a little bit of STC rating, so that's nice. And there's also one last piece of this. In our particular structure, I didn't mention this up front, this is going to end up being a stucco finish, and there are in fact some very simple 1-layer and 2-layer 1 hour rated stucco finishes. So we don't have to put gyp on the outside, which a lot of folks think you do, to get that fire from both sides rating. Just one side with type X on the inside gets you 1 hour. On the outside we put in the OSB sheathing typically, and then a stucco finish, and then there are a couple proprietary systems that'll get you that. I'm not going to list them here though. Continue. Then from the dwelling unit to dwelling unit partition, in this particular case the architect decided on a dual layer wall, really looking for that sound. And it just so happens there's a standard system that looks like this, 2x6 walls. In fact, I think this one's actually 2x4. I couldn't find the 2x6 when I was looking at it, but nonetheless, 2x6, there is one for it too. Again, very simple, nothing in there, just 5/8 on each side, a gap in the middle, usually 1 inch. And if you add some insulation, again, you've increased your STC a little bit beyond what's necessary.